You will marry this girl, or you are no son of mine, the mother shrieked. The son flinched, but said nothing. She thinks money buys everything, the bride whispered later, a cold smile touching her lips. But the price she's about to pay is far higher than she imagined. The mother, a widow who had clawed her way from poverty, saw her son's marriage to the wealthy bride as her family's only path to security and status. She had forced him to end his relationship with the poor girl he loved, believing love was a luxury they could not afford. The wedding day, set in a lavish hall in Casablanca in 2022, was the culmination of her ruthless ambition, a public declaration of their arrival in the world of the rich. Before continuing, if you believe a mother's love should be unconditional, hit like and subscribe right now. The son stood by the large arched window of the dressing room. He wore a tailored suit that felt like a cage. His fingers traced the cool metal of a locket hidden in his palm under the expensive fabric of his jacket. Inside the locket was a faded photograph of the poor girl he loved. He stared at the image. A sharp tug on his tie made him drop his hand. His mother stood before him, her eyes hard. She adjusted the knot, her movements precise and forceful. Forget her, the mother said, her voice low but sharp. Today, you become a man of status, a man of status, a man who matters. The son's hand instinctively went back to its pocket, touching the locket. The mother saw the movement. Her eyes narrowed. She slapped his hand away. The locket clinked against the fabric. I said, forget her! The mother's voice rose slightly. That life is over. That life is over. This is your life now. Outside the window, far below, the sounds of the busy street drifted up. A street vendor shouted, his voice surprisingly clear. Tissues for happy tears. Get your tissues here. The son looked towards the sound, a bitter smile touching his lips. Happy tears. The mother turned him back to face the mirror. Straighten up. Your bride will be here soon. Her family owns 3 factories. 3 factories. What did that seamstress own? A single needle? Which life do you choose? The son looked at his reflection. He saw the expensive suit, the carefully styled hair, the face that felt like a stranger's. He stayed silent. His silence was his answer, his complicity. The mother nodded, satisfied. She picked up a gold-embossed wedding invitation from a nearby table. She ran a finger over the raised lettering. This, she said, holding it up, opens doors. Doors that were always closed to us. Don't you understand? The son looked away from the invitation, back towards the window. The vendor's shout faded. The mother placed the invitation back on the table. She smoothed the lapels of his jacket. Go, she ordered. See to the guests. I will wait for the bride. The son walked out of the room. The heavy door closed behind him. He walked down the ornate hallway, the sound of his footsteps muffled by thick carpet. He reached a smaller, less public corridor. He stopped outside a service door. He opened it quietly and slipped outside into a narrow alleyway behind the hall. He pulled the locket from his pocket. He looked at the photo again. He ran his thumb over the cracked glass cover. The locket's clasp was broken. It didn't close properly anymore. He walked quickly down the alley, away from the sounds of the arriving guests. He emerged onto a side street, a different world from the grand entrance of the wedding hall. He walked for several blocks, the expensive shoes pinching his feet. He reached a different part of the city, where the buildings were smaller, the streets narrower. He found the familiar, worn building. He climbed the stairs to the small apartment. He knocked softly. The poor girl he loved opened the door. Her eyes were red. She wore a simple dress. She didn't speak. The son stepped inside. The apartment was small, filled with spools of thread and scraps of fabric. An old woman, the girl's grandmother, sat in a corner, her fingers moving quickly, stitching. I had to see you, the son said, his voice low. The girl stepped back, letting him enter fully. The grandmother looked up, her eyes sharp, her eyes sharp. What is there to say? The girl asked, her voice flat. The son reached into his pocket. He pulled out the locket. He held it out to her. I can't ... The girl didn't take it. She walked over to a small table covered in embroidery. She picked up a piece of fabric, a small square, intricately stitched with a pattern of roses and thorns. She held it out to him. So you don't forget what's real, she said. The son took the fabric. His fingers brushed hers. He looked at the stitching. It was beautiful, but the thorns seemed to pierce the roses. Suddenly, the door burst open. The mother stood there, her face contorted with rage. She must have followed him. What is the meaning of this? The mother shrieked. Her eyes swept over the small apartment, the piles of fabric. The old woman, disgust, flickered across her face. I told you, this is over. The mother advanced into the room. You have a bride waiting, a real bride, with real wealth. The son stepped in front of the girl. Mother, please. Please what? The mother snarled. Please let you ruin everything? Please let you throw away our future for this? She gestured around the room with contempt. Look at this place. Is this what you want? Poverty? Poverty? Struggle? Struggle? She turned to the girl. You think you can keep him? You think come on, your stitches can compete with factories? The girl stood straight, her chin raised. Love is not a competition, she said quietly. The mother laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Love is for beggars, she spat. She turned back to her son. Her voice dropped, becoming cold and hard. You will go back to the hall now. Now. You will propose to the bride today. Or I swear I will burn every photo of your father, every single one. You will have nothing left of him. The son froze. His father, the only good memory he had. The mother knew his weakness. She always did. The girl stepped forward. Don't let her, she said to the son. As the girl spoke, her embroidery needle, still in her hand, pricked the son's finger where he held the fabric. A single drop of blood welled up, staining the delicate stitching of a rose. The son barely felt it. He was staring at his mother. The mother smiled, a cruel, triumphant smile. The car is waiting, she said. Choose. The son looked at the girl, at the grandmother, at the small apartment. He looked at the blood on the fabric in his hand. He looked at his mother, standing in the doorway like a gatekeeper to his past and his future. He turned and walked towards the door. The girl made a small sound, a choked gasp. The grandmother's needle stopped moving. The son walked past his mother without looking at her. He stepped out of the apartment and back into the alley. The mother followed, pulling the door shut behind her. They rode back to the wedding hall in silence. The son clutched the small piece of embroidered fabric in his pocket. A blood stain felt strangely warm. Back at the hall, guests were arriving in a steady stream. The air was thick with a scent of expensive perfumes and flowers. The son was directed towards a large room where the bride and her family were waiting. He entered the room. The bride sat on a decorated chair, surrounded by her family. Her father, a large man with a stern face, stood beside her. He was looking at his phone, his brow furrowed. The mother pushed the son forward. Go, she whispered. Now. The son walked towards the bride. He felt the weight of his mother's gaze on his back, the weight of the bride's father's calculating stare. He reached the bride. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. Her father put his phone away, watching them closely. The son knelt down. He felt clumsy, his knees protesting against the hard floor. He looked at the bride's face. He opened his mouth to speak the words he had rehearsed. The bride's hand moved. She dropped her phone onto the floor beside her chair. It landed with a soft thud. The screen faced up. The son saw the bright light of the screen, a recording app open and running. He quickly picked up the phone, handing it back to her. Their fingers brushed. Her hand felt cold. She gave him a small smile. He took a deep breath. He looked into her eyes. He began to speak the rehearsed words of proposal. The bride listened, her smile unchanging. Her father watched, a hint of satisfaction appearing on his face. The mother beamed from the side of the room. The son finished speaking. He held out his hand. The bride placed her hand in his. It was a public display, a performance for the assembled families. The mother stepped forward, her face radiant. She looked at the son's pocket where the fabric was hidden. She reached down and subtly crushed something small under the heel of her shoe. The son felt a faint crunch from his pocket. He knew what it was, a small piece of embroidered fabric. His mother had seen it or guessed. The bridesmaid, a quiet girl standing behind the bride, moved forward to adjust the bride's dress. As she did, her hand brushed against the son's leg. He felt something small and soft being pressed into his hand. He closed his fingers around it. It was a small piece of fabric, a different piece. The engagement party was a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. The son moved through the crowd like a puppet. The bride stayed by his side, her demeanor demure and pleasant. She laughed at the right moments, accepted congratulations gracefully. At one point, the bride accidentally spilled a glass of red wine on the front of the mother's expensive dress. The mother gasped, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. "Oh, I am so sorry!" the bride exclaimed, her eyes wide with feigned distress. The mother's face was tight with annoyance, but she forced a smile. It's quite all right, my dear. Accidents happen. She looked around. Where is that seamstress? She can clean this. She started to call for one of the hall staff. The bride put a hand on the mother's arm. Please, don't trouble anyone. It's just a dress. I prefer stains to pretenses anyway. She smiled sweetly. The mother's smile faltered for a second. Later, while the mother was distracted talking to guests, the bride moved away, her phone in her hand. She walked towards a quieter corner of the room. The son saw her. He saw her lift the phone, the recording app still open. He saw her look towards his mother, who was loudly boasting about the wedding arrangements. The bride's expression shifted, the sweet smile replaced by something cold and calculating. She held the phone discreetly, her thumb hovering over a button. The son saw her lips move, whispering something into the phone. He heard his mother's voice, clear and loud from across the room. I'll ruin that seamstress if she breathes near my son again. She thinks she can challenge me? I decide who he marries. Love is for beggars. The son watched as the bride's thumb pressed the button on the phone. The recording stopped. The bride lowered the phone, her expression returning to one of pleasant innocence. Outside, fireworks suddenly erupted, painting the night sky with bursts of color. The son looked towards the sound. He imagined the poor girl he loved watching from her window in the slums. Did she see the fireworks? Did she know they were for his engagement party? He clutched the small piece of fabric the maid had given him. The wedding day arrived. 400 guests filled the grand hall. The air hummed with anticipation. The son stood at the altar, his heart heavy. He saw his mother in the front row, beaming, her face a mask of pride and satisfaction. He saw the bride walking down the aisle, a vision in white lace and silk. The bridal train flowed behind her, a long, intricate tapestry. He saw the maid walking behind her, holding the end of the train. He saw the subtle nod the maid gave him as she passed. The bride reached the altar. She stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The officiant began to speak the traditional vows. The son looked at the bride. Her face was calm, her eyes focused on the officiant. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a play. The officiant reached the part of the vows about love and commitment. The bride took a deep breath. She shifted slightly. She reached into the folds of her dress. She pulled out her phone. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The mother's eyes widened. The bride pressed a button on the phone. A voice filled the hall, amplified by the sound system. It was the mother's voice, loud and clear. Love is for beggars. The mother's voice boomed. I decide who he marries. I'll ruin that seamstress if she breathes near my son again. The hall erupted in gasps and murmurs. Guests turned to look at the mother. Her face was ashen. The bride held the phone steady. The recording continued. The mother's voice, cold and cruel, filled the silence that followed the initial shock. I'd rather see my son miserable than poor. The mother shrieked. She lunged forward, scrambling towards the altar, towards the bride. Do me that! She screamed. Chaos erupted. Guests stood up, whispering, pointing. Some pulled out their own phones, filming the scene. The mother reached the altar, clawing at the bride, trying to snatch the phone. The bride stepped back, holding the phone away from the mother. The long bridal train twisted around them. As it moved, the lights of the hall caught the fabric, illuminating something unexpected. Intricate embroidery was woven into the silk of the train. Patterns of roses and thorns, stitched with different colored threads. And woven within the patterns, small words, lines of text. The son stared at the embroidery. He recognized the stitching. He recognized the words. They were lines from the letters he had written to the poor girl he loved. Lines about his feelings, his hopes, his despair. The girl had stitched his own words into the fabric of his wedding day. The mother stumbled, tripping on the edge of the bridal train. She fell forward, crashing into the multi-tiered wedding cake. The elaborate structure swayed precariously. Frosting and cake scattered across the altar steps. One of the tiers slid off, hitting the floor with a messy splat. The son stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. His mother, covered in cake, screaming. The bride, holding the phone, her face now cold and hard. The guests filming, whispering. And the bridal train spread out like a map of his own betrayal, stitched with the words of his lost love. He looked down at the small piece of fabric still clutched in his hand. It was the scrap the maid had given him. He opened his hand and looked at it. It was a piece of the same embroidery, a single rose, stained with his blood. The mother scrambled on the floor, covered in white frosting and bits of cake. She shrieked, pointing at the bride. You! How dare you! Guests surged forward, phones held high, capturing the scene. A man in a sharp suit, a relative of the mother, rushed towards the bride. Give me that phone! He yelled. The bride stepped back, holding the phone aloft. This isn't just on my phone, she said, her voice clear despite the noise. It's already everywhere. A young woman near the front, the bride's cousin, gasped, staring at her own phone. "It's trending! Hashtag sham wedding!" she shouted. Other guests checked their phones, faces showing shock, amusement, and outrage. The sound of clicking cameras and phone notifications filled the hall, drowning out the mother's screams. The son stood rooted to the spot. His eyes darted from the mother on the floor to the bride with the phone, to the bridal train spread out, revealing the embroidered words. He saw the bloodstain on the rose. His heart hammered against his ribs. His social media-obsessed cousin was shouting about trending hashtags. This wasn't just a private humiliation. It was a public spectacle broadcast to the world. The mother, ignoring the frosting, crawled towards the bride. "You're destroying this family," she wailed. The son felt a wave of nausea. He wanted to run, to disappear. He wanted the ground to swallow him whole. He looked at the bridal train again, at the words stitched into the silk. "You promised." He remembered saying those words to the poor girl, promising he would find a way for them to be together. He hadn't. He had betrayed her. He had betrayed her. He had betrayed himself. A hush fell over a section of the crowd near the entrance. Heads turned. The poor girl stood there, holding the unfinished bridal train, the part that hadn't been attached yet. It was covered in more embroidery. Dates were stitched into the fabric, alongside more roses and thorns. Dates of canceled meetings, of missed calls, of times the mother had deliberately kept them apart. The poor girl walked slowly down the aisle, holding the fabric. Her eyes were fixed on the son. She reached the altar area, standing near the edge of the cake debris. The mother saw her. "You!" she shrieked again, pointing a frosting-covered finger. "Get out! This is a private event." The son looked at the poor girl, then at the mother, then at the bride. He saw the truth laid bare in the embroidery, heard it in the mother's voice on the recording. He saw the bride's cold resolve, the poor girl's quiet strength. He felt a locket in his pocket, heavy and cold. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the altar steps, ignoring the cake mess. He gripped the locket in his hand. The metal felt sharp against his palm. He squeezed it tight. A memory flashed through his mind. His father sitting with him just before he left. His father's voice, low and serious. "Don't let her make you a coward." The bride stepped closer, her voice a low whisper only he could hear over the murmuring crowd. "Your mother paid my father to fake our wealth," she said. "We're both her puppets." The son looked at the locket, his father's face smiling faintly in the faded photo. His father, who had escaped the mother's control by leaving. Was that his only option? Escape? Or could he fight before continuing with everything on the line? What choice would you make? Answer in the comments. He looked at the locket, at the broken clasp. He looked at the photos inside, the poor girl's face beside his father's. He saw the embroidered fabric, a testament to a love his mother had tried to destroy. He saw his mother, covered in cake, screaming about her reputation. He saw the bride, standing tall, her revenge complete. He ripped the locket chain from his neck. It snapped with a small sound. The locket fell into his hand. He opened it, the broken clasp protesting. He pulled out the small, faded photos. He threw them into the air. They fluttered down onto the frosting-covered steps, landing among the cake crumbs. The crowd gasped again. The mother wore a diamond necklace, a symbol of the status she craved. As she lunged again towards the bride, her necklace caught on a piece of the falling cake stand. The string snapped. Pearls scattered across the floor like white tears, rolling among the cake and the scattered photos. Guests gasped, some instinctively reaching to catch the falling gems. The son stood up, stepping over the debris. He walked towards his mother, who was now on her hands and knees, trying to gather the scattered pearls. Her face was streaked with frosting and tears. "This," the son said, his voice shaking but clear, "is all you have left." He gestured at the pearls. "This is what you chose over everything." The mother looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock and fury. The bride stepped forward, holding out the dowry check her family had given her. She walked past the son and the mother, stopping in front of the poor girl. She tore the check in half. "This was never about money," the bride said to the poor girl. "It was about breaking free. Take it. I only wanted revenge." She pressed the torn check into the poor girl's hand. The poor girl looked at the check, then at the bride, her expression unreadable. The son walked back to the altar steps. He picked up a small piece of embroidered fabric with a blood stain. He looked at the locket still in his hand. He raised his foot and brought it down hard on the locket, crushing it against the stone floor. The metal bent, the glass shattered, scattering tiny shards. The sound echoed in the suddenly quieter hall. The distorted reflections of the guests' faces appeared in the broken glass. He turned to his mother, who was still on the floor, surrounded by pearls. He walked over to the bridal train spread across the floor. He picked up the section the poor girl had brought, the one with the dates. He walked back to his mother. He knelt down and gently, deliberately draped the embroidered fabric around her shoulders like a shawl. shawl. The stitches spelled out the dates she had sabotaged his life, woven with roses and thorns. It was a shawl of shame. Guests began to leave, whispering, their phones still out. The mother sat on the steps, the embroidered shawl draped over her, the frosting drying on her face. She didn't move. The bride walked towards the exit, her head held high. She paused by the poor girl. Burned their world like they burned ours, she whispered, then walked out into the night. The son looked at his mother one last time. He saw the embroidered dates on the fabric around her shoulders. He saw the scattered pearls. He saw the empty, ruined wedding hall. He turned and walked towards the poor girl. He took her hand. They walked together towards the exit. Paparazzi and news crews had gathered outside, alerted by the viral video. Flashbulbs exploded. Microphones were thrust towards them. They walked past, hand in hand, not speaking. Behind them, inside the hall, the mother remained on the steps, clutching the embroidered shawl. The hall staff began to clean up the cake and debris. A street child who had slipped in during the chaos darted across the floor, picking up scattered pearls. He saw the shattered locket near the altar steps. He scooped it up, tucking it into his pocket with a smirk. 1 year passed. The grand wedding hall stood empty, a reminder of the scandal. The mother now ran a small fabric shop in a bustling, crowded market in the slums. Her hands, once manicured, were rough from handling bolts of cloth. She sat behind the counter, her back straight, her face unsmiling. The door of the shop opened. The street child who had found the locket stood there. He was a little older, his eyes sharp. He walked up to the counter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the locket. It had been crudely repaired. The metal bent back into shape. The glass replaced with a piece of clear plastic. He placed it on the counter in front of the mother. Inside, visible through the plastic, was a new photo. A photo of the son and the poor girl smiling, standing together in front of a simple building that looked like a community center. It seemed they had found their own kind of wealth, their own kind of status. The mother looked at the locket, then at the child. She picked it up. She snapped the locket shut. The crude repair held. She looked at the child for a long moment. Then, without a word, she turned and placed the locket in the shop's display window among spools of thread and colorful fabrics. She adjusted it carefully. She found a small price tag and wrote on it. The price tag read, "Not for sale."